So the French military just boarded a Russian ship that may have launched drones into NATO airspace last week. Russia says they've uncovered a Ukrainian false flag operation designed to drag NATO into the war, and Europe's largest nuclear power plant has now been offline for a full week, raising concerns that a major nuclear incident could be possible. But first things first, we just crossed the $100,000 mark on our most recent fundraiser because you all are incredibly generous. We're just like 4 or 5 days into this and moving incredibly fast. So we're picking up drones for a couple units in Ukraine's east, fighting around Kramatorsk. We're running this through Ukraine Aid Operations, so a registered 501c3. Every one of your donations is tax deductible, and we have a 1-to-1 donor match, so double the impact for every one of your contributions. If interested and able to participate, the link is in the description below. But let's go ahead and dive right into this French boarding of a naval vessel. That's the footage that you're seeing here, just came out a couple hours ago. And according to some reporting in the Associated Press, they said, quote, French military personnel have boarded an oil tanker named on a list of Russia's Shadow Fleet vessels and suspected of being a launch pad for mystery drone flights that forced the closure of airports in Denmark last week. Photos showed Navy personnel on the deck of a tanker known as the Boracay, which has used numerous identities and was one of 4 Russia-linked vessels in the seas near Denmark at the time of the drone sightings on 22 and 24 September, which so far have not been fully explained. The tanker was sailing from St. Petersburg, carrying 750,000 barrels of crude oil to India, but was intercepted by a French naval vessel on Sunday and diverted towards western France. A French public prosecutor said the investigation was taking place after the crew's failure to justify the nationality of the vessel and refusal to cooperate. So, good. I like it. You know, the optimistic side of me says we might start seeing some NATO member states stepping up in ways like this and adding more pressure to Russia in ways that we haven't really seen before. This is one of those methods that we could go about to add additional pressure to Russia, going after their Shadow Fleet. This is one of the ways they bypass the sanctions and now tariffs that have been placed on their economy. Now, Russia, not surprising, not happy about this. Through a couple different media outlets, they're pushing back. By and large, the sentiment is Russia, saying they need to add more naval firepower as escorts for their commercial vessels. Rybar says, quote, episodes of open piracy by a NATO member are becoming more frequent. Today, French special forces landed on the tanker Boracay. The EU and U.S. authorities link it to the so-called Shadow Fleet of Russia. It is pointless to listen to the voice of reason in this situation. The collective West in recent years has repeatedly shown lack of logic and adequacy in its actions. You can kind of hear the anger in this, right? They say, we now repeat what has been said many times. The merchant fleet needs protection. The Baltic Fleet ships have been escorting some vessels for several months, and especially in the coming years, increased tensions in the Northern Hemisphere seas should be expected. They say we need to develop alternative options, build up military shipbuilding, and develop alternative options for ensuring the security of trade routes. So personally, I think this is a good move. It'll be interesting to see what the French military takes off this vessel, what they're able to find or not find. My understanding at this point is the only publicly available intelligence is that those ships were in the general vicinity of where those drones were spotted last week. So we'll see if there's anything on board, equipment on board, or materials, or maybe communications that point that finger at Russia. If it does, that's a really big deal. So I don't want to speculate too far in that direction, but if we find out that these were Russian drones being flown over NATO member state airports, that's significant. And again, we've talked about this in recent videos. I think it is just a continuation of Russia testing the NATO alliance to see what we're going to do and how far they can go before we actually respond. Now, one of the member states they are regularly looking at to see if they're going to respond is Poland, because Poland has been kind of talking a big game for quite a while now. You'll recall at the United Nations last week, their foreign minister Sikorski issued a warning to Russia saying like, hey, you fly anything into our airspace again, we're going to shoot it down. You've been warned. Don't come back here crying. And this actually ties into some of the false flag accusations floated by Russia in recent days. And we're seeing Sikorski kind of stick to that, those talking points right now. He just did an interview a couple days ago where he said, look, we're going to protect our skies, no questions asked. Here we go.
In the end, every sovereign country has the right to deal with intruders. You wouldn't tolerate Cuban MiGs over Florida, and we will, in the end, protect our citizens.
Now, these false flag accusations are interesting in a lot of ways, but before diving into that, a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Audion. So there's probably 3 key things that most people take away from their time in the military: discipline, leadership, and hearing loss. I mean, I've had doctor's appointments before where they see the service record and say, I assume you have some degree of hearing loss. We're just going to run a test to see how much. And they're not wrong. It turns out constant exposure to artillery fire, helicopters, gunfire, and the occasional IED is not exactly ideal. And that's where the sponsor of today's video comes in, because I know a bunch of you could use something like this, but you probably don't want to pay $3,000 to $5,000 for some clunky looking earbud. Audion Hearing has just released their new Atom X hearing aids for just $389. These are the world's first touchscreen controlled hearing aid where you can instantly control your hearing aids directly from the case. No apps, no tiny buttons, just effortless hearing control. They're available over the counter with no prescription needed, which is big. I mean, hearing aids used to be prescription only and cost as much as $5,000. Now, Atom X has noise canceling technology, is Bluetooth compatible, and they're ready right out of the box. There's no setup required. Look, whether it's you or a family member experiencing hearing loss, I know how frustrating that can be. So if any of this hits home, consider checking out the link in the description and the pinned comment below to learn more about the Atom X hearing aids. And of course, thank you to Audion for sponsoring today's video. So a false flag, the whole concept behind this is you pretend like it's one country carrying out an attack when really it's another. It's a false flag. So in this case, what Russia is accusing Ukraine of putting together is Ukraine carrying out an attack, pretending that it is Russia. So whoever's on the receiving end of this attack, the nation looks at that and goes, oh my God, look at what Russia did. We have to respond to Russia. Meanwhile, they have actually been drug into the war by Ukraine. Personally, I feel like in recent years, the term false flag gets thrown around way too loosely. When it's an event that people don't really like or maybe is a little bit surprising, false flag tends to be one of the narratives. They're not all that common realistically, but I think the concern is that we, people around the world, don't want to be tricked into going to war. I get it. I don't want to be tricked into going to war. So we're maybe a little more skeptical of everything and very nervous about the possibility of false flags. The interesting aspect here is Russia is saying, good news, everybody, we uncovered it. And historically, what we've seen is Russia lay things out that could be false flags that might just be Russian operations. And they're trying to muddy the information space. So when it is uncovered, they can go, hey, we told you. That was Ukraine. It definitely was not the Russian saboteurs that are maybe on the verge of getting captured in Poland, which is probably what's happening here. Now, we'll note that about a week ago, Russia put together a similar story saying Ukraine is gathering down Russian drone components. They're going to launch those into Poland and say this is an attack by Russia. That was one. This is two. Alexander Kotz, a Russian mill blogger, said, quote, Kyiv is preparing a new provocation. The foreign intelligence services have revealed the scenario of another provocation being prepared by the Ukrainian special services. The main intelligence directorate and the security service of Ukraine, so GUR and SBU, plan to send a reconnaissance and sabotage group into Polish territory, consisting of Russian and Belarusian special forces. In reality, it will include traitors from the Freedom of Russia Legion and the Kalinovsky Regiment. So Freedom of Russia Legion, we've been fortunate to interview that unit before on this channel. Those are Russian citizens that are fighting with Ukraine against Russia. They want to see a free Russia. They want to see the end of Putin's regime. And then the Kalinovsky Regiment is actually Belarusian volunteers fighting with Ukraine against Russia. So Kotz's idea here is that they're going to have Russians and Belarusians that are currently fighting for Ukraine kind of swap out some patches, move into Poland, start carrying out attacks. Now, I guess the way that this is supposed to shake out is that these groups, they're going to be detained, they're going to be picked up, and then they'll willingly go on camera to say, we're Russians. Yep, you got us. We are Russian saboteurs, and we came here. This was Moscow, put this plan together in Belarus, and we're attacking Poland. Dang, NATO got in our way. You detected us. So they said this is supposed to come alongside another staged attack on Poland's infrastructure to what they say is amplify public resonance. The goal of the provocation is clear: to demonstrate to the international community that Moscow is escalating the situation. Zelensky understands that time is not on his side and his only chance for victory is direct military intervention by NATO countries in the conflict. He'll do everything possible to drag them into the war. And this was, yes, Mill blogger there. It was repeated and kind of amplified on more traditional Russian outlets. TASS picked it up, for instance, talking about Kyiv preparing a staged event in Poland, including service members from Russia and Belarus. The reason this one is interesting is all of these kind of come with, something that isn't all that far off, like drones going into Poland. It's not crazy to think that Ukraine probably has their hands on a lot of downed Russian drones. At the same time, Russia is launching drones into Polish airspace. So it's not a leap to figure out how that story could come together. Same thing here. Russia has been carrying out sabotage operations across Europe for a long, long time. That's nothing new, to include inside of Poland. So it's not completely out of the blue for Russia to say, well, why don't we just say that some of those Russians and Belarusians aren't actually ours, they're Ukrainian. They're seeding the information space. So this is something we need to keep an eye on as more of these stories materialize. Now, one quick note, they're saying here that the only way that Ukraine can possibly win this war is by involving NATO. More and more, we're getting pushback on that from senior officials around the world, including Ukraine envoy General Kellogg, who just a couple days ago talked about how, a couple clips here I'll play, he said Russia cannot win this war. Also, Russia has no desire to take on NATO because they wouldn't have any chance against an actual NATO force. Let's play those clips here real quick from General Kellogg.
But he cannot overpower NATO. He cannot overpower the West. He just can't. He does not have the capacity to do it. I have talked to senior leaders in Washington, D.C., and I've been asked that very question. Can Russia win this war? I said, no, they can't. They do not have the capability to win the war. That Russia is not winning this war. Because they've got a definition of victory that I do. And what I mean by that is they've not crossed west of the Dnieper River. They have not been able to take Kyiv. They've not been able to take Kharkiv. They haven't taken Odessa. They haven't made any of their goals. This was, quote, a special military operation.
Hey, look, pretty positive words from General Kellogg, right? I mean, I know I'm optimistic, and I try to find the positive things here and say, look, maybe we're actually trending in this direction, but it does follow a series of similar statements being made from U.S. officials in recent days, especially following President Trump's statements and Truth Social post at the United Nations General Assembly this past week. Now, Russia, on the one hand, is accusing Ukraine of going into Polish territory and setting off some sort of explosive charges. Meanwhile, Ukraine is actually doing that inside of Russia. We've got a clip that I'm going to play here in just a second where the Ukrainian GUR says they carried out a strike in the Stavropol region of Russia. Before playing that clip, I want to give you a quick look at where that is. We've got Ukraine up here on the map, down here to the southeast. So this is the location of where this strike took place. So it is, sabotage operations well behind the front line. But let's go ahead and play that clip here real quick. Again, coming from the Ukrainian GUR, sabotage operations in Russian territory. Here we go. So kind of a reconnaissance of the area. Think about how dangerous this would be for anybody to carry this out. Every aspect of this. So they're spotting, and what they said here in terms of the announcement, they say on September 27th, as a result of a successful operation by the GUR with support of the Caucasus Liberation Movement, 3 Rosgvardia members, so the National Guard, were eliminated on the territory of the aggressor state near the settlement of Tambukan in the Stavropol region. Here they are recording their targets. They say a lieutenant colonel of the Rosgvardia who headed the enemy special unit Avangard, as well as the assistant and driver of the Russian leader, were destroyed. A group of Muscovites was traveling to the training ground but never arrived. And here they are traveling to the location, and you'll see a detonation here in just a moment. Again, every aspect of this, from the reconnaissance, there it is, from the reconnaissance to the recording of the incident to the transmitting this back, making it public, and somehow still not giving up their identities is incredibly risky. But we are seeing that pretty consistently. Sabotage operations like this, targeted assassinations against Russian military personnel well behind the front lines. Ukraine isn't slowing down there at all. Now, I mentioned some issues with the power plants, and there's actually 2 ongoing right now. The one we're going to key in on here is Zaporizhia, where President Zelensky just put out a statement saying, quote, an emergency situation at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. The situation is critical. Because of Russian shelling, the plant has been cut off from power, disconnected from the electrical grid, and is being supplied with electricity by diesel generators. This is extraordinary. The generators in the plant were not designed for this and have never operated in this mode for so long. and we already have information that one generator has failed. It is Russian shelling that prevents the repair of the power lines to the power plant and restoration of public safety. And this is a threat to absolutely everyone. No terrorist in the world has ever dared to do this to a nuclear power plant, what Russia is doing right now, and it is right that the world does not stay silent. Now, my understanding, again, is that this is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, but it's not the only one under these circumstances right now. ABC put out a note saying, quote, "Concerns are mounting again over the safety of Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which has been cut off from an external supply of electricity for more than a week. Captured by Russian forces early in the war, the facility no longer supplies power to the grid, but still needs electricity to cool its 6 inactive reactors and spent fuel. Emergency generators are currently keeping the systems running." Grossi, the head of the IAEA, said conditions remain stable for now, but warned that restoring reliable external power is vital. The reactors of Zaporizhzhia have been shut down for more than 3 years, lowering the risk of a major incident, but a complete loss of power could lead to fuel overheating if cooling systems fail. Ukraine has blamed Russian artillery for the latest power loss in Zaporizhzhia. Moscow rejected the accusation, with Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, calling it stupid to suggest that Russia shelled a facility it controls. And for what it's worth, Russia is continuing to say that Ukraine is actually the one striking the plant. Real quick, to give you an idea on the location of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, again, deep state map here, zooming in to Zaporizhzhia, right on the Dnieper River here. So, in fact, let's turn this over to a satellite view, give a little better look. Right in here, you've got the nuclear power plant. So, there's the location. It is technically in Russian-controlled territory with the Dnieper River and Ukrainian-held territory here across the river. So, this is, full transparency, the ins and outs of nuclear power plants and the dangers of it being shelled or offline for a period of time, way over my head. But when you start to see people like the IAEA step into this and explain what the situation looks like and why this is critical, I feel like it's worth keeping an eye on. So we're going to do that to the best of our ability, but don't be looking for any detailed nuclear power plant breakdown or understanding of what's happening there from me anytime soon. Maybe we'll pull on an expert that can dial into some of the more details there and better break this down than I can. That's all we got for now. For those interested, again, to participate in the fundraiser, over $100,000 now. Hopefully we close this thing out in the next couple days. That'd be awesome. But that link will be in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.